Hello and welcome to all of the viewers from around the world, from North America, of course, from England, here in Israel, and locations elsewhere, who are joining us for this special tradition program being convened together with our publisher, the Rabbinical Council of America, and of course, our dear friends and partners at the Sacks Legacy for what I believe is the first event in what will be a series of programming online, in real world, around the world, as we lead up to Rabbi Sacks's fifth yard site. Rabbi Sacks, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, of course, is no stranger to anyone who is with us, or I dare say, listening to us through recording in the future. His impact on the Jewish world was astounding. He bestrode it like that colossus, and his light continues to shine and inform our own religious life in our own particularistic religious community, throughout the Jewish world, and dare I say, throughout the human world of um, of of how we think about ourselves and our responsibilities and our duties. We were very, very proud at Tradition to partner with our friends at Sacks Legacy to put out what turned out to be the largest issue in the nearly 70-year history of our journal. I would hasten to observe that Rabbi Sacks was a longtime member of our editorial board. His very first scholarly essay was published in our pages, along with a number of other items that he published with us over the years. Those are available in our archives at traditiononline.org. And now we present to the community 17 insightful, keen essays exploring his thought, what his teachings and his writings continue to mean to us, and I should think will mean to generations of his students for many, many, many years to come. I would say that, of course, those of you that want to continue to perpetuate his legacy should be reading Tradition. He thought Tradition was noteworthy. You should too. Please subscribe to us. Go visit us at traditiononline.org. Sign up for our newsletters and subscribe for the print journal, or even better yet, gift a subscription, perhaps to a younger person who should be discovering the ideas that we tackle in each and every one of our quarterly issues. I would mention that our consulting editor, Dr. Erica Brown, who I also think is probably familiar to all of us, will be holding another event next week on the evening of the actual yard site on Monday, November 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, New York time, on Zoom, in which she will be discussing the article that she contributed to the volume, and that can be accessed through the Facebook and the web page of the Sacks Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership at Yeshiva University. And of course, on the day of the yard site itself, on November 11th, the Sacks Legacy will be holding its, I think now, annual Global Day of Learning, and information on that can be found at the website rabbisacks.org. So we thank all of our partners for that content, and I think over the next week or so, leading up to the art site, it will be a celebration of his teaching, and we're very pleased to kind of kick off that programming here at Tradition. At Tradition, we're very grateful to the RCA for our publisher, who stands behind everything we do, and particularly to the organization's president, Rabbi Eitan Tokeyer, and to my particularly good old friend, Rabbi Menachem for his leadership of the organization and for the support that he provides us at Tradition. So for a few words of welcome, over to you, Rabbi Penner.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Sacks. Thank you to everyone who helped make today possible, who helped make this very, very special volume of Tradition possible. It is our honor at the RCA to be the publishers of Tradition and to be part of this and so many other wonderful things going on. Chaval al da'avdin v'lo mishtachin. It is with a note that despite all the great work and all the people working around Rabbi Sacks, all the people influenced by Rabbi Sacks, we feel such a tremendous loss even 5 years later. There have been 3 special volumes in recent history marking the loss of Rabbi Lamb, Rav Lichtenstein, Rabbi Sacks. The original phrase "Chaval al da'avdin v'lo mishtachin" is said at the beginning of Parshas Va'era, at a point of a turning point for Jewish history, but a point where there was so much confusion as to how to understand what was going on. Why were the tragedies intensifying in the Jewish people at a time when things were supposed to be heading towards Geula? We are in such a time now. And the sage words of a Rabbi Lamb, of Rav Lichtenstein, and of a Rabbi Sacks would be so helpful to us to be able to understand what's going on in our world. It's for that reason that we're so proud to have this volume, to continue the legacy, to distill the legacy, to try to understand what it was, not just the individual messages, but the overall thought of Rabbi Sacks, to be able to help guide us through these difficult times. I invite you that even as you take another look at tradition, to take another look at the RCA, because even as we look back, we look to those who've guided us. It's so important to be able to have the leaders of today, the rabbinic leaders of today. I encourage you to take a look at www.rabbis.org, the new website for the Rabbinical Council of America, which is supporting the rabbis who support the entire Jewish community. So thank you for tuning in. I want to turn it back to Rabbi Sacks. Thank you for everything that you do for tradition and for the Jewish people. Yesher koach.
Thank you, Rabbi Penner. I will also, again, reiterate my thanks to the Sacks Legacy for partnering with us on this. And I should really, of course, single out Rabbi Dr. Jeremy Bruce, who was the Yozem, the initiator of this whole joint project. And, of course, to Joanna Ben Arosh, who stands often quietly but powerfully behind the scenes of everything that remarkable organization does and will do for many years to come to guide the Jewish people and to perpetuate the legacy of Rabbi Sacks. And I'm grateful to them for partnering me with Tzvi Sinensky and Sam Lebens, who representing Sacks Legacy as my co-editors on this special issue, and we'll be hearing from them. But first, a few words from Gila Sacks, representing from her role on the board of the Sacks Legacy. But of course, you understand that she represents much more than that organization. She speaks very powerfully in her role as the daughter of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Gila contributed forward to the issue, which is open access at traditiononline.org, entitled "The Challenge of Smallness or Greatness," and it captures something very profound about what Rabbi Sacks was doing through his teaching and through his examples. So, Gila, we turn to you for a few opening words.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sacks, and thank you everyone for being here today. Great to see a lot of old friends on the screen and to have a chance to mark this fantastic publication. Now, I have to tell you that many of you will remember, but in the months after my father died, Tradition ran a beautiful project, the Rabbi Sacks bookshelf. And each week, one of Rabbi Sacks's Talmidim would choose a book, not a book written by Rabbi Sacks, but a book read by Rabbi Sacks, a book that had influenced his thought, and they would explore how that book shaped his work. Now, I mention it partly because for me, those columns were a weekly ray of sunshine in that dark COVID winter. But really, I mention it because they were, in a very particular way, a glimpse for me at what his legacy was to become. Because Rabbi Sacks didn't just want us to listen to him. He wanted to inspire us and challenge and provoke us to go out and read and learn for ourselves. His sermons and his books and writing, they were just the jumping off point. Say ulamad, go out and learn. And as he taught, so he parented. Nothing made him happier than to be challenged and argued with by us. Nitzchuni banai, he would beam at us. And it was a path that, of course, as you've said just now, it was a path he, of course, had trodden, using often the pages of tradition to critique and dissect and argue with his own great teachers over the years. Which is why it's so meaningful for me to see the publication of this special edition of Tradition. Because reading and learning Rabbi Sacks's work is one thing. It's a great thing. But what really shows me that his work will last is when people argue with him, critique him, use his jumping off points to expand and enrich their own voice, their own Torah, because that's the essence of Jewish learning, the holiness of the argument. The Talmud in Shabbat tells the story of Rava, who was waiting for Rav Hamnuna to turn up to a lesson. But Rav Hamnuna was late because he was spending extra time at Mincha. Rava says of Rav Hamnuna, "Look at this, he is forsaking the delights of eternity and immersing himself in the pleasures of this world." It's quite an extraordinary passage. Can you think of any other religion in the world that would consider prayer a kind of secular pursuit, the pleasures of this world, compared to the eternity that you get in study? Because study, interpretation, debate creates. It moves us forward into something new. When Rabbi Sacks died, we were left with a huge amount of writing and teaching he left behind. It was, of course, an immense blessing, but also a heavy weight of responsibility. What would we do with it? Would it last? Would it stay relevant as the world moved on? Now, as we reach the 5th Yahrzeit, marked by the publication of this volume and by the release of Rabbi Sacks's Chumash, it feels like we're beginning the next chapter. We, his family and his Talmidim, don't need to carry the weight of his work and legacy. Now it's out there in the world, taking its place on the global Jewish bookshelf. So it's with deep gratitude from me personally and on behalf of the Rabbi Sacks Legacy that I thank the editors of this volume, Rabbi Dr. Samuel Lebens, Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Sinensky, and Rabbi Jeff Sacks for their outstanding work and dedication. As you've said, a special thank you to Rabbi Dr. Jeremy Bruce for bringing this project to fruition, and in the honor of whose late mother, Deanna Bruce, the volume is kindly sponsored. To all the Tradition team, to the Rabbinical Council of America, and all the project sponsors. And thank you to the exceptional scholars and educators who contributed pieces, many of whom are close friends of our family, and all of whom we are honored to learn from. Rabbi Sacks wrote, "Judaism is, in short, an ongoing conversation between that once and once only divine voice that sounded at Sinai and the human interpretation of those words that has continued in every generation since. It is the great conversation that never ended." That, for me, is Rabbi Sacks's legacy. Just one voice in a great conversation, which, thanks to all of you, will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Gila. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to work together with you and your contribution to the volume, and I'm glad that we agreed that we were going to be on a first name basis, because despite all of your respect for me, sincerely felt, I felt it was ridiculous that I should be the Rabbi Sacks in this relationship, even though one of us spells our name incorrectly. What we're going to do for the rest of the evening is have our editors engage in conversation with 3 of our authors. We had 18 different authors in the volume. You'll be hearing from some of the others who couldn't appear tonight on the Tradition podcasts that will be released over the next days and weeks. And as I mentioned, the other programs where their writing will be featured. But we'll start off tonight by hearing from Dov Lerner about his paper, Jacob's Struggle and Messianic Journeys. Dov is the rabbi of the Young Israel of Jamaica Estates and also teaches at Yeshiva University's Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought. And he'll be speaking with my co-editor, Sam Lebens, who's an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Haifa. So, gentlemen, take it away.
Hi, Dov.
Hi, Sam. How you doing?
How are you doing?
Glorious.
Good, good. Well, it's our great pleasure to have been able to include your article on Rabbi Sacks and Messianism in this special issue dedicated to the intellectual legacy of Rabbi Sacks. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, as we engage in research on various topics, we sometimes come in with a view as to what we're going to say in a paper, but then over the course of researching, we find that we're surprised by various things. Did anything Messianism? If so,
So, am I surprised? I'm surprised I couldn't hear you correctly. But yes, I think I got the gist of the question. And firstly, thank you to you and to Tzvi and to Rabbi Sacks for your toil and time on this remarkable product. It's just a wonderful thing to read and behold, and I'm kind of honored to be among my fellow authors, and it's a pleasure to see Rafi and Malka as well, and everybody who's joining us. Yes, I was surprised along the way writing this paper. I teach a course on the thought of Rabbi Sacks at YU, and I had in mind that I would explore what I took to be a rather extraordinary view on messianism that I found in the chapter in To Heal a Fractured World on the part of Rabbi Sacks on Tikkun Olam. And he distills partially elsewhere in The Great Partnership, in Future Tense, and in On God's Name. But I was surprised by two things. The first surprise was that when you look for something, sometimes it stands out in a way it hadn't before, and it was striking to me how central a concern messianism writ large, the belief in redemption, how it manifests, appeared all over his works from the very start, from Tradition and Untraditional Age and all the prefaces of all his works going forward, even in his ostensibly more secular or general directed works. The Politics of Hope is about how Britain should get itself together, and his the end of that book is about how this has been about a push against messianic politics. It seems to define so much about impatience and utopianism in the West. So firstly, I was surprised by how widespread his concern about this issue was in a way I hadn't noticed before. But secondly, as I was researching, I was fortunate enough through the Sacks Legacy on his website, has a number of pamphlets he wrote when he was, I wouldn't say in his youth, but in his early stages of writing. I came across a series of very short, very brief, very accessible pamphlets published through the United Synagogue dealing with central issues, one of which was messianism. And I discovered that not only does Rabbi Sacks' thought on this evolve over time, but it almost revolves over time. There is a massive shift in the way Rabbi Sacks speaks about messianic hope, what the expectation is, and how we should anticipate a messianic end, in a way that made, for me at least, the paper much more interesting, although in some ways more delicate, because I didn't want to psychoanalyze Rabbi Sacks or treat him from a position of judgment, but it made it a lot more interesting to see the shift over time, and in some ways also a lesson for all of us about epistemological humility when we face big questions. So those were the major surprises.
I mean, I think one of the really interesting features of this special issue as a whole, and your paper is a good example of this, Dov, is that a lot of the scholars who were investigating questions in what we might call Sacks scholarship, trying to uncover Rabbi Sacks' philosophy or ideology, they were struck by the ways in which his views evolved over time. And, I, looking at Rabbi Sacks, tend to think of somebody who has a tremendously consistent vision across his entire career. And I think that's true, but only partially true, because there were some moving parts and I think this issue of tradition really helps to shine a light on. There are some moving parts or aspects within an otherwise quite consistent worldview that change quite radically. So, okay, you've told us there's a lot of change. Could you say in a nutshell? I don't want to spoil the experience of reading your paper for our audience, but how would you characterize the main transformation or change in Rabbi Sacks' thinking on messianism?
Yes, so we can try in a nutshell. Messiah's coming tomorrow. That's in a nutshell. So in some ways, actually, that's what's at stake in the change, is that from the 1982 pamphlet, Rabbi Sacks appears to advocate for, not just describe, but really advocate and promote an idea that one could characterize as somewhat messianic religious Zionism, that the founding of the State of Israel is a marker of the dawn of redemption, as the prayer for the State of Israel, as it's done in America on the whole and in Israel on the whole, that this is Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, this is the dawn of the flowering of redemption. And really, reading that pamphlet, Rabbi Sacks was more than encouraging, or almost summoning world Jewry to buy a plane ticket and go and build the land as part of a vision may be inspired by Rav Kook, who he references a lot, Rav Alkalai, Rav Kalisher, the main harbingers of Messianic religious Zionism, and in some ways inspired by Maimonides in a very pragmatic political goal about Messianism. Truth is, I know we only have like 30 seconds, but it might be helpful to take a step back just so that it doesn't sound like a lot of names and information. As I was writing this, it helped clarify for me as well how to access this question. And when it comes to Messianism, fundamentally, there are two questions. Question one is, what does it look like? What is the destination that I expect? And we may have a vision all in mind of what we've been taught or how we've been tutored to think about this, but that's question one. Question two is, how do we get there? What's the journey? And they are sometimes interlinked, but radically different questions. So I'd say 1982, Rabbi Sacks answered to question one, what is the vision? It was a somewhat parochial, narrow, limited political vision that Jews would have sovereignty, independence, and justice in their homeland. And that's inspired again by Rav Kook, Maimonides, Rav Alkalai, Rav Kalisher. And that's why he was summoning Jews to kind of make the move and offering the critique.
Mystic vision of a political and naturalistic vision of Messiah.
Correct, which is in some ways a more modest vision, but also much more activist, something you have to get up and do something right now in a very, whether it's militant or political, but certainly in a material sense, to activate that sovereignty. By 1990, when Rabbi Sacks is writing his full-length books, and from that moment on, in all the books he published, almost yearly after, he has a very different view. And he goes from being inspired from Maimonides to the Arizal, a mystic. And his answer to that question now of what does it look like is far more expansive and far more ambitious, much more cosmic on the one hand. Like what we expect to see at the end is not just Jewish sovereignty, but actually cosmic healing, where there's no pain, where there's no suffering, where there's no aging, where there's no iniquity, where there's no inequality, a kind of almost perfect world, which is a radically different answer to that question. And you might think, if you've got a much more expansive and ambitious vision of the destination, that the answer to the second question, how we get there, is even more activist. But actually, Rabbi Sacks at that moment pivots a little bit, inspired by the Arizal, to speak of much more local, much more domestic acts of kindness to the people in your sphere of influence, as a more manageable, if more long-term vision for how to get there. And that pivot that goes to a much more expansive idea of what Messianic redemption brings, but a much more domestic vision of how we get there, I think also speaks to a lot of the qualities outlined by Rafi in his piece about humanism, and also to Malka about his view of the diaspora and how we can actually manage Judaism in the diaspora over time and validate it in some ways. But that was kind of the major shift. That wasn't really a nutshell, but it was a big nut.
No, it's fascinating. You very tactically haven't given me enough time to ask you the most controversial question that I wanted to get to. But what is really beautiful about what you described, and perhaps counterintuitive to those who know about Rabbi Sacks's biography, is that there's a sense in which his views about Messiah become a bit more Chabad over time, in the sense that he as a young man, he was very much influenced by the Lubavitch movement, and that was a continuing influence. But you might expect his earlier views to be more in line with Chabad mysticism, where you have a very expansive messianic epoch that's brought about by the everyday mitzvah of the regular Jew, and you might think perhaps that would moderate and become more influenced by religious Zionist voices or modern Orthodox voices over time. You seem to describe the opposite trajectory.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And this is where it became a little challenging to try to pinpoint, is there an explanation for this shift, which again is not just a natural evolution, but really a pivot. And at the end of the paper, I offer a couple of suggestions with due humility, but I'll leave something hanging for the listeners to follow up on if they're interested. So,
yeah, I mean, he certainly came to think that Messianism is a dangerous idea politically. He talks about the left wing or the right wing harking for a utopia that never was, past golden age that never was. and the left wing harking for a golden utopia that never will be. And you say, well, what about the Jews and Messianism? And it seems like he theologizes it and takes away the political dimension of Messianism as he matures as a thinker. Is that a fair?
Yeah, in his book, The Great Partnership, if I'm not mistaken, there is a chapter when religion goes wrong, and he has 5 different areas that he thinks religion can go wrong, and one of them is messianic politics. And again, it makes you ask, isn't that one of the 13 central tenets of our faith, to believe in the Messiah? But the focus is on the politics, not messianic belief, but harnessing that to the political sphere, which is where he was in 1982. Is where he sees
theological rather than political.
Right. In that ways, you're right.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dr. Dov Lerner. I think it's now time for me to pass on to. Do we go back to?
No, I'll introduce now our next speaker is Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zarum. Also, I doubt unknown to most of our listeners, but Rafi is the dean of the London School of Jewish Studies, which of course there might have been an essay in the book. And perhaps in our next volume, we'll have it on Rabbi Sacks's relationship and leadership of the London School of Jewish Studies, Jews College, Lisha Avar. Rafi is the dean of LSJS, where he also occupies the Rabbi Sacks chair in modern Jewish thought. His very intriguing article was titled, enigmatically, The Renaissance Rabbi, and we'll let him explain what that means. And he'll be talking with our third co-editor, Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Sinensky, who's the director of the Lamb Legacy Project, a very important project which intersects, of course, historically with tradition because of Rabbi Lamb's role as the founder of tradition, and he is also the director of Jewish Studies at the Mainline Classical Academy. So we'll turn it over to you, Rafi and Tzvi.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sacks. Thank you, Rav Dov and Sam, for an opportunity to kind of relive so many wonderful conversations. And we'll have to get back in a room soon to continue, because this is just fascinating. And Rafi, with that, it was incredibly exciting to have the opportunity ahead of this small conversation to reread your piece. And I was really thinking about your title. And really trying to drill in this notion of a Renaissance rabbi, because when I think about it, I think very often, and perhaps many others who are here with us today think of Rabbi Sacks as being very much influenced by the Enlightenment. I think of him very much as an Enlightenment thinker. I think about the centrality of social contract and how he plays off of that to build his notion of covenants, who he's quoting, who he's reading, in books like The Home We Build Together in particular. I'm thinking of that emphasis on freedom and, some of these elements. And in my mind, very often, many of these elements are associated, I think, with the Enlightenment and how he sees that as contributing or in significant ways consistent with, if not identical with, Jewish thought as well. And yet, as Rabbi Sacks just noted, the title of your essay pushes back on a lot of that. So can you share with us just a little bit, how do you see Rabbi Sacks as a Renaissance rabbi?
Well, thanks, Tzvi, for that introduction and the question. And but first of all, just to thank you and Sam and Jeff for what you've done with the booklet. It's come out really, really well, and the articles are fascinating. What I call it the Renaissance rabbi. So when he stood down as chief rabbi in 2013, he talked about a Judaism engaged with the world. When you think the phrase that, well, I grew up a Renaissance man, I mean a Renaissance woman as well, is someone who's well-rounded, accomplished, and educated in many different fields, and he definitely was that. But it wasn't just that he was well-educated; he believed in understanding those two worlds together properly. A real understanding of the relationship between the two and seeing it as one world. He was very strict with me about don't do lectures or courses about modern orthodoxy. Show them how we learn, how we integrate or see this all integrated. And anytime we went to a lecture of his, you'd always end up with a book list to take home of more things you had to do. But as you know, the Renaissance is a Renaissance person is actually focused, as you say, on the Enlightenment, on that particular period. But going back to the early Italian Renaissance, the 15th century. And what's amazing there is the move from kind of fundamental religious belief as God as the center of the universe to the move into man or humankind, humanism we're talking about here. It's religious humanism, but it's about the infinite power and capacity of humans to do things. And it's so shocking in a way because it seems the opposite of what Judaism talks about of being God-centered. And yet Rabbi Sacks got really excited by this great speech of Pico de Mirandola about the centrality of man in creation being unlike anything else. And so once I started thinking about that, I then began to think, how do you look at Judaism in that way? How much of our Judaism is much more centered on humans rather than God? And I talk about the third bracha in the Amida, but just because it's this week's Seder just now, we just had a lechacha v'yeh bracha, you should be a blessing.
Right.
One of the midrashim, it's in Tanchuma as well, says that God says to Abraham, you're going to be such a blessing that from now on, until now, only I bless the world, right? So the word bracha occurs only in Breshit when Adam when Hakadosh Baruch Hu creates the fish and Puruvu with them, and then with humans, and then with Noah. But now Avraham can be a blessing, and it goes further. Tanchuma says even more. What are the first two blessings of the Amida? The first one is remembering the Chasidei Avot and Magen Avraham, and the second one is Machayei Mitim. So God says your bracha comes before mine. So that's another example. There's a tension here. And Judaism is really radical, I think, on this Chazal of how central humanity is to the world and taking control and being responsible. And Rabbi Sacks really brings that down in so many different ways. So when I thought about that, and that he quoted Pico de Mirandola so many times and was fascinated by this Renaissance, I see him as a Renaissance rabbi, as someone who was engaged. He didn't see it as multiple worlds, but as that you have to get knowledge from absolutely everywhere and solo everything to understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do in this world and to see it all as one.
It's so interesting. So I guess, it's interesting because in the title, it's a Renaissance rabbi, and of course it's going to be a capital R, just because of the rules of the English language. But I think what if I understand correctly, you're really arguing in your essay that Rabbi Sacks was a Renaissance rabbi, both with the lowercase r and with a capital R. And perhaps the former might have been more self-evident, but what really struck you perhaps was the capital R components of that. And to really understand them, but we have to go back. And all that resonates, and it's really one of the things that your essay inspired for me was to now reread Rabbi Sacks with an eye toward, okay, how many times is he quoting, not just Enlightenment thinkers or other great thinkers, but Renaissance thinkers in particular, and this motif of freedom that I initially saw as more associated again with an Enlightenment kind of worldview that actually maybe it's rooted in earlier thinkers as well that obviously had their impact on Enlightenment thought as well, but perhaps it's rooted even earlier, and to kind of reread, as you say, Jewish sources in that light as well. So I really appreciated and continue to appreciate and kind of turning over this question in my own mind. And so I'm particularly glad that you really brought that to the fore in your essay. And yet then, I remember when we were talking about your essay a little bit, you said, Tzvi, I did something a little bit unusual in this one. Usually I have a thesis and I set it forward and I develop it and so on. And yet here I took a little bit of a turn, an unexpected turn. And you make the argument that in the second half of your paper that Rabbi Sacks as a Renaissance rabbi is somehow related to his thought on the Shoah, on the Holocaust. And I didn't see that coming, I have to confess. What do you see as the relationship between these two important topics, obviously?
Well, look, it's for me, it's fundamental. If you see as human beings have the ability to do anything and have that incredible power, then implies also they have incredible power to do evil. So what I wanted to do for this book, and you and some have done a great job, is that a lot of the writers put Rabbi Sacks in context of other thinkers. I think that's really important to be part of a wider world of thinking. So I wanted to see, when Rabbi Sacks addresses the Holocaust and where was God and those classical issues, how does he look at it? And again, I think that he looks at it as a Renaissance rabbi. He begins, obviously, quoting with his teacher, Rav Soloveitchik, and, the big changes with Rav Soloveitchik, because until then, the tradition was to say, because of our sins, because what we have done wrong, to look internally. Why did the Holocaust happen? We wouldn't say it overtly to a survivor, but in our prayers, on Tisha B'Av, we say to God and on the Chayim as well, because of our sins, we've made mistakes, these bad things happen to us. And Rav Soloveitchik is one of the first major rabbis in the Orthodox world to get up and say, you can't say that about the Holocaust. You can't say that. It's too shocking. right? And it's a different approach. But once he opens that door, Rabbi Sacks takes in a totally different direction. He says, I'm not interested in about God. I'm interested in about humans. How could humans have done this? The only lesson is, what does it mean to be a human? And he says, if humans have unlimited evil, right, then what does that mean? And what does that mean about the good that we can do? And again, that's a fundamental Renaissance issue. It's human centered. And so much so that he doesn't get in to this philosophy so much. And I don't know what Sam thought of that side of it, but by the end, when he's writing in Tehillah Fractured World,
that's why they stuck me with you. So we
yeah,
want to
no,
hear what Sam had to
Rabbi
say.
Sacks, he moves on. I mean, he's got a great
Yeah.
chapter on Eov where he talks in Tehillah Fractured World about this. But
Yes,
then he ends up telling his last major essay about the Holocaust. He's writing stories of survivors, of people. He finds meaning in the actions of human beings. That's the big change. You know, it's really fascinating. And again, just think of this week's Seder Va'era. Again, you know, he's talking to God, but then people show up, and he's got to make tea for his guests, right? People come. It's the people-centeredness of the Torah, and you see it with Avraham. The beginning of it's so clear that it's this time. You see that
it's like Gadol Achnasas Orchim is even greater than Kabbalas B'nai Shechina.
Right.
It's not just an important midrash. It's foundational to
exactly. So that's the point I want to make. It's not just when we learn them as kids, but the first stories we learn, Avram did a lot of chesed. That's another thing. But no, we're learning about the nature of Avraham. First, we have the lecha of Yeh Bracha, and then here we have the kindness to human being. That is what Torah is. And God takes a back seat and says, go on, humans, go and do it. But making us bracha, that's what it really means. And once you see it in that way, it affects every area of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rafi, we're out of time, and yet kind of like the session before me, I want to ask the most important or urgent question at the end. So I apologize. I'll just try to stick it in just 1 minute or even two at most. You argue, of course, as we've said, that the Rabbi Sacks is very much humanistic. And when Rabbi Penner was introducing the session earlier, he pointed to, among Rabbi Lamb, but also to Rav Lichtenstein. And I think many on this call revere Rav Lichtenstein and of course, his role in the larger tradition community at large. And he, of course, wrote prolifically in a particularly important and pointed essay about Judaism and humanism. And you point that out in your essay, and yet you say that despite them both being humanistic rabbis, there are differences between them. Can you just take just a few moments? So what do you see as the core differences, and how would we kind of pursue that distinction further between the two?
Yeah, I mean, Jeff directed me into the wonderful essay, which you all read from tradition, about by Rav Lichtenstein about religious humanism. What Martinosh, what is man, and the centrality of it. And Rav Lichtenstein focuses it in a halakhic way. He looks at the power of halacha to create freedom. That we, by studying and acting on halacha, kind of take control of our reality of this world.
Similar to halachic man, perhaps.
Exactly. So it's halakhic humanism. But I would characterize Rabbi Sacks as ma'asim tovim humanism. But and what do I mean by that? Rabbi Sacks says, and this is a key issue again in Tehillah Fractured World, that you don't make a bracha for a positive mitzvah ben adam l'chavero because the act itself is a mitzvah. And he makes this radical statement. I'll just read you the line because it's so interesting. He says, he actually says that these are not part of the cluster of behavior whose character is defined specifically by Jewish beliefs. It's beyond that. Tears have no national boundaries. He's trying to argue a kind of universalistic aspect of it, which is a different focus than Rav Lichtenstein. It's not so much they're arguing, but the highlight. Rav Lichtenstein will focus in how that I take responsibility of this world through halacha, whereas Rav Sacks says it's in my natural understanding of doing chesed in the world around me that is the difference. When you compare the two, it's really interesting that they're similar and yet fundamentally different.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's what interested me.
Good, very good. It's fascinating. Thank you so much. I wish, again, we continue for much longer, but God willing, we will. And authors can as well by accessing your article. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tzvi.
Thank you, Rafi. Thank you, Tzvi. We'll now turn over to Malka Simkovich, whose essay, The Jewish State and the Failures of Diaspora, Three Approaches, draws on, it seems, a topic that's been greatly occupying you in these last years. You wrote a book about the nature and meaning of Galut, which received an outstandingly favorable review recently in Tradition. I commend that to readers' attentions. And it also actually is a preview to an upcoming article that will appear in our next issue or the one after that, on a series of articles from Dr. Simkovich on related themes. But here she turns her attention to how it plays out in Rabbi Sacks's thought and the thought of some other leading 20th century thinkers. Malka is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Publication Society and is also a visiting professor at Yeshiva University's Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies, and she'll be speaking with Sam, who we invite back to the stage.
Hi, Dr. Sinkovich. Malka, it's really nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's great to see you.
Good. So I had the pleasure of knowing you in a previous incarnation before your fabulous job at the Jewish Publication Society, which is really exciting. But you used to be involved in Jewish-Catholic relations in Chicago and in Jewish interfaith, interreligious efforts. So I suppose a background question for the audience about this paper that you've written for our special edition of Tradition, which we're so excited that you've been able to be one of our authors. The question is, to what extent, and I mean, your scholarship goes all the way back to Second Temple Judaism time. I mean, your research is really, really interesting. You know, I commend it to the audience, your various research outputs. But given your kind of historical perspective, how would you say, or if you can encapsulate, how would you say the existence of a Jewish state, the state of Israel, has changed the terrain of interfaith relations?
It's a huge question, and I appreciate your starting there. And I think maybe it would be helpful to start with an inverse question, not how did the establishment of the state of Israel impact Jewish attitudes towards interreligious dialogue, but how did the establishment of the state of Israel impact other attitudes that were coming out of Christianity and maybe even other faiths as well towards the Jewish people? How did the establishment of Israel impact the Catholic Church? And we have to ask this question because the kind of dawn of modern Jewish participation in interreligious dialogue really doesn't come out of Jewish initiative. It comes as a response to overtures that come from outside faiths and from the Catholic Church in particular. And so it's important to consider whether the establishment of the State of Israel did impact the Church and its decision to reach out to the Jewish community in the 1960s. And then we could think about that question and then consider the Jewish perspective. And the answer that I would give is that I don't think it does that much. I think that the pivotal moment in the 20th century that really prompts the Catholic Church to say we need to totally reorient our attitude towards Jews and Judaism is the Holocaust. It's not the establishment of the State of Israel. It's the Holocaust that prompts the Church to introspect, to repent of its sins, to reach out to the Jewish community. And this produces a cascade over time, over a few decades. Jewish leaders such as Heschel, of course, we'll talk about Rabbi Sacks, and many other figures within and without the Orthodox community respond to the overtures. And that dialogue flowers into different kinds of dialogue with members of other faiths.
We are the only ones that don't have? Probably. What is this?
I think maybe someone needs to be muted. I'm sorry.
There we go.
But
is there anything on the screen?
In any case, I'm just going to talk over it. It's the Holocaust, I think, that really is the pivotal moment for the Catholic Church. But that is not the case from the Jewish perspective, right? From the Church's perspective, the Holocaust prompts this massive introspection that's totally straightforward. And the State of Israel is theologically complex. In fact, church leaders are still arguing over whether the political sovereign state of Israel is theologically meaningful at all. Now, from the Jewish perspective, and I don't like saying the Jewish perspective, but really any 20th century Jewish thinker, Rabbi Sacks included, who is contending with the question of interreligious dialogue, they cannot extract the establishment of the State of Israel from the Holocaust. These are two interrelated phenomena. Of course, you could debate what the relationship is, what the meaning is, but you can't engage with the question of interreligious dialogue without asking the question of what does it mean to have an independent Jewish sovereign state. But already you can tell that these faith communities are having different conversations with one another when we enter into the table of dialogue. Very often the Catholic Church is ready to introspect when it comes to this sordid and tragic history of anti-Semitism, this kind of lachrymose history of the Jews. But when it comes to the state of Israel, they are a little tongue-tied. They have not kind of figured out how to assess the political modern state of Israel. And again, the picture on the Jewish side is very different. The question is, how does it matter? How does the existence of the modern state of Israel impact our attitude towards other nations? Should it make us more interested in engaging with non-Jews, or should it in fact make us more independent, less vulnerable, and not anti, but certainly disinterested in dialogue, because we don't have that vulnerability anymore? And so my article offers 3 different approaches towards this question, and shows that Rabbi Eliezer Berkovitz said, the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel enables Jews to build an independent civilization outside of our vulnerability, and concurrent with that, the Shoah proved the inherent animus between Jews and other nations and the necessity of the land of Israel. Rabbi Soloveitchik took a different approach. For Soloveitchik, there was potential for the Jews to be on the cusp of an age of redemption if they answered the call. And likewise, I don't want to spend the next 10 minutes on confrontation. I'm sure most people on this call are very familiar with it. But interreligious dialogue, while an ideal, in practicality, was not tenable, because there would be, according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, inevitable expectations of theological transactionalism. And that brings us to Rabbi Sacks. Rabbi Sacks takes
I would just say, for those in the audience who aren't aware of what confrontation is, though, I mean, we assumed that many people were, and therefore we shouldn't cover the ground too much, and I accept that. But it was a pivotal paper by Rabbi Soloveitchik that took a very, you might say, negative stance towards interfaith dialogue, and not to interfaith relations, but relationships, and alliances, but to interfaith dialogue, it took a negative.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Back to you, Malka. Sorry.
No, that's a great clarification. For Rabbi Sacks, I would say that the Jewish state enabled the Jews to build an ideal Jewish civilization founded on its own moral principles, which includes engaging with the whole family of nations in the present reality. And so, to put it very simply, I would say it's the particularism. By the way, I wrote a book on universalism, and now I can't stand using the word because I feel that it is used so often without definition. So after I finish writing the book, I try not to use the word, but it's an important word, but it requires definition. So you'll infer one of many possible understandings of universalism by what I'm going to say. I think for Rabbi Sacks, the particularism of the Jewish state enables or unlocks the universalist ideals of the Jewish people, so that by having what we would call particular sovereign Jewish state, the people can now fulfill themselves in every sense of the word by answering the call to have a sustained and meaningful relationship with all people. And that's very different from the justified pessimism of Rabbi Berkovitz and the chasm between the present and the reality that we find, the present and the present and this idealized future that we find in the writings of Rabbi Soloveitchik.
So what I find interesting here is, in a sense, what you've told us is that the creation of the State of Israel didn't in and of itself act as a catalyst for Christian approaches to interfaith dialogue. If anything, they're still, as you say, tongue-tied over the significance of the State of Israel. The Holocaust was the precipitating historical event that led to Christian 20th century outreach to Jews in an attempt to foster dialogue. But of the 3 thinkers you interrogate in this paper, Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Berkovitz were both born in Europe pre-Holocaust, and they both survived the destruction of the world they knew, relocated to America, and had to build again. Rabbi Sacks was born in 1948 alongside the State of Israel, and perhaps he's the first major Jewish thinker, or one of the first major Jewish thinkers, for whom the existence of the state of Israel was always a reality. He didn't know a world that was destroyed, or the sorts of vulnerabilities of pre-state Judaism that were so vivid to Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Berkovitz, given their experiences and their losses. Do you think, Rabbi? I mean, it's not for us to psychoanalyze, but do you think that Rabbi Sacks is being born post-Israeli independence, or with Israeli independence, affected his outlook on interreligious relations?
Yeah, there's no question that that's the case. When Rabbi Berkovitz and Rabbi Soloveitchik were developing their thought, they were writing at a time when the future of Israel was considered tenuous, even after 1948. Questions about Israel and its future were existential. And this changed after 1967, but maybe not completely. For Rabbi Sacks, the questions about Israel's future, especially when he's writing at the very end of the 20th century, are perhaps less existential and more about how the Jews can use this moment as a moment of profound opportunity and possibility that can enable them to participate in the family of nations in the wake of Jewish sovereignty. So that's absolutely a different orientation, and he is, just given the present reality, able to be more optimistic. It also explains, I think, why Rabbi Berkovitz and Rabbi Soloveitchik, when they're talking about interreligious dialogue, really they're talking about Jewish-Christian dialogue. And that is a huge difference.
Yeah, Rabbi Sacks has a much broader perspective on interreligious. It's not merely. Yeah.
Absolutely. When Rabbi Berkovitz is talking about what it means to interact with outside faiths, and he says, all we want is for them to lay their hands off of our children, you can't understand that line, that agonizing line, outside of the Holocaust and his association between what happened in the Shoah and anti-Jewish theology that comes out of.
He's not speaking to Buddhism. That's just not.
Not speaking to Buddhism, no.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a huge contribution that Rabbi Sacks makes, and not to critique Rabbi Berkovitz and Rabbi Soloveitchik. Like you said, they're coming from a different historical context. But what Rabbi Sacks does is he invites us to think about Judaism vis-a-vis the family of nations. And that's a huge contribution that also produces major, I'm not going to say problems, but I'll say questions, because we can no longer be reactive. Right? It's not just about responding to the overtures of one community. Now we have to say, what does it mean to develop a systematic theology that is not reactive, but that orients us towards all people? What does that mean? And there's a huge underlying question here, which is, can God produce multiple covenants? What does it mean for God to care about people outside of the Jewish?
Can God have relationships with peoples outside of our covenant? No, absolutely. These are questions that Rabbi Sacks has to deal with in other works. As with other interviews, I didn't have time to ask my most pressing and controversial question. I think one of the things I most loved about your paper, Malka, is that after exploring these three thinkers, it also raises, and I think you raise, profound questions for modern Orthodox thinkers in the diaspora to answer. But instead of asking you what those questions are, or even giving the audience a hint to what those questions are, I invite them to read your paper and hopefully to be confronted with an important perspective and set of questions, not merely a study of three historical thinkers. Thank you, Malka.
Thank you so much, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Malka. Thank you, Malka. If I can, we can just take a few more minutes of the audience's time, and what a nice audience it's been. What a nice crowd. Just to speak together with you, Sam, and you, Tzvi, my co-editors. There you are, Tzvi. First of all, thank you both. It was such a pleasure to work with you on this project. And in addition to your work in the editor's office, you each contributed an important paper of your own. So just like in a little lightning round, I wanted to draw those to the attention of our listeners. Tzvi, you wrote a paper which in some ways is a companion piece to the essay that you wrote in the Rabbi Lamb Memorial issue of a number of years ago. Of course, your work with the Lamb Legacy Project takes you into close contact with the massive archive of Rabbi Lamb's drashot. Rabbi Lamb called himself an unrepentant darshan, and you, my friend, are the scholar, the unrepentant scholar of darshanut, or at least you have become. And it would be an interesting, you may be on the interesting path to a book, examining the great darshanim of the last century. You have already one essay on Rabbi Lamb and one essay on Rabbi Sacks. Your essay was titled Rabbi Sacks' Sermons, an Initial Appraisal. So just tell us, making this deep dive into the archive of Rabbi Sacks' sermons, what did you discover? What was surprising?
Yeah, such a great question, and it really was a tremendous zechut. And I see Joanna's here, so thank you so much for the zechut to be able to access the archives. Rabbi Michael Leitner, I think, is also on the call, so as the director of archives, and being able to access the sermons of Rabbi Sacks was for me a complete revelation. We spoke earlier about we made the point that many of the essays, kind of editing many of them and reading all of them, many of them outline changes, or shifts. And we were talking about this earlier in terms of Rabbi Sacks's thought. And was kind of curious to see how that does or doesn't play out during his earlier presentations, because essentially, nearly all of the essays in this archive are from his time in the rabbinate, with a couple of exceptions toward the very beginning of his chief rabbinate, but they're basically almost all 1978 to 1992, 1993. So 2-3 years, maybe 2 years at most into his chief rabbinate is really the overwhelming majority of the material. And I was stunned by the tone and the passion and the way that he was so outspoken. I'll just give one example, and I mentioned this briefly in my essay as well, but there are so many, but it's very timely, is he imagines a scenario, Jeff, in which when the Jews ask for their freedom, instead of Moshe going to Paro, this is one of the sermons, Rabbi Sacks says, imagine if instead he demanded the autonomy and independence of the Jewish community of Goshen. That's what we want. And then Paro starts their growing power, and you see all of this. And so Paro comes back, can't just kick them out or just dismiss Moshe. So instead he comes back with a series of alternative proposals. And Moshe shoots them all down, starts a counter movement, which he calls the Goshen Liberation Organization. Right? This is a play on the PLO. Sacks was not being subtle here, and he doesn't use it to castigate, but he does use it to very clearly illustrate to his audience, to his congregants, the unreasonability of what he presents with the Palestinian position. Now, when I read this, and many other drashot, I was stunned by not that the position had necessarily changed, but the presentation, the mode, and perhaps the audience as well. And so I felt that Rabbi Sacks was inviting all of us into a conversation about whether or not there was an evolution in his own approach to leadership. Was it that when he was talking to a particular set of community members, or just an earlier stage in his career, he was perhaps more of a firebrand, more outspoken in certain respects? And is it that he made a conscious decision, and if so, why, later on in his career? And this really opened up the question, and it really was striking. And that Rabbi Sacks himself inspired me to continue to explore that, including with students who really knew him best in that.
Well, let me challenge you with another question, which we didn't rehearse, so I hope it doesn't catch you off your feet.
Those are the best, Jeff. Yeah, let's do it.
As a student of the sermons of Rabbi Lamb and of Rabbi Sacks, compare and contrast. What were the essential points of overlap, and do it in 1 minute.
I'll do it in 1 minute. That's the rest of it was easy. That's the impossible part. Just get rid of my rabbi, and maybe I have a shot. But what I would say is as follows. First of all, Rabbi Lamb shows much more continuity. And Rabbi Sacks, you see this shift underway in terms of thought. Rabbi Lamb, from his drashot to here, I think is striking. But the other thing that I think is very telling is, I would say that the way that the themes that Rabbi Sacks speaks to, you see the distinctiveness of the British audience that he's addressing, versus Rabbi Lam. So I'll give an example. Rabbi Lam spends 4.5 years as the rabbi of Kilat Kadima in Springfield, Massachusetts.
A tiny little congregation.
And you wouldn't know it from the Just Show, let me tell you. Don't burst my bubble here, Jeff. Thank you, though. And he talks about the dangers of wanting to be normal, of just wanting to be average, right? Because this is mid-century United States of America. It's just a different world with a different set of issues. So I think that the insights that I gained into not just their approach, Rabbi Sacks is the young firebrands, Rabbi Lam is the more mature, outspoken, but a little bit more restrained than Rabbi Sacks in that earlier era. But I think also you just see tremendous insights into the issues that were animating the respective.
We should use the opportunity to let all listeners know about the newly rebuilt and expanded and relaunched website of the Lamb Legacy Project, which is lamblegacy.org.
Yeah, can I just add one thing, if I may? Once we're doing that, once we're putting it out there for the audience, just today, for the first time, we have released PDFs of the vast majority of Rabbi Lam's books. They are available. There will be there will be also text files that will be available on the website as well. But if you go to lamblegacy.org and just Google Torah Umada, you'll see the majority of the books already appear there. There are some glitches because I haven't announced it to the public and I have to put in some additional things, but they're out there. You're the first to know.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks for that news. Now, Sam, your very engaging title was Rabbi Sacks a theological maverick or a mystical traditionalist? So what do you mean by that, and which one was it?
Well, you really have to ask Tzvi, because Tzvi, as well as his many gifts as a scholar and a rabbi, he's also a fabulous editor. And he suggested this title to me after I'd written the article. But there are these two horns, like I say, maverick or traditionalist mystical. What do I mean? There are many places in Rabbi Sacks's writings where he says quite bold, striking things about God, describing God as a person. And sometimes in Jewish ears, that sounds like a very Christian thing to say, that God is a person. But that's because they're thinking of person as like a human person, which is what Christians believe, that God became incarnate in a human person. But no, that's not at all obviously what Rabbi Sacks means when he describes God as a person. He has in mind a more philosophical notion of being something like a rational agent with its own mind that can think things, perhaps feel things. And describing God as a person is to describe God as such a being. And there are other places in his writings where he seems to adopt what contemporary theologians call an open theism. Open theism is the view that because God has gifted humans with free will, he has, so to speak, blindfolded himself in terms of knowledge of the future. Because by giving humans the freedom to write the future, he has to somehow establish an unwritten future, a future that humans are going to partner with God in writing. And thus, until the future happens, so to speak, God can't be certain as to what's going to be written in the future. God can be surprised by his creatures because the future is open. This view, as I said, is called open theism. But those are very, very controversial views. And Rabbi Sacks sometimes just asserts them without caveat or qualification. And I discuss where he does that, why he might do that, the arguments in favor of divine personalism. The arguments, those arguments in the paper. But then I ask a question which takes us all the way back to Rabbi Sacks' first ever published essay in the Pages of Tradition in 1975, where he seems to articulate a much more traditional view of God that's rooted in Tanya, in the mystical works of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it turns out that actually all all of these radical things that he was saying about God being a person and God being in time may have only been a fragment of a more profound theology that's actually consistent with the Tanya and consistent with the Nefesh HaChaim. So to speak, what ends up happening is God merely appears to us as if he's a person. God merely appears to us as if he's in time, but there's some more fundamental theology that's really doing the heavy philosophical lifting behind the scenes. So was Rabbi Sacks, and this we can never know, was he initially wedded to a Tanya mystical theology as he articulates in the 1975 essay, before abandoning that in favor of something much more maverick, a divine personalism and an open theism? Or in his later works, was he only sharing perhaps a fragment of a broader theology that remained consistent with his roots in the Chabad mysticism of
lest one of our listeners is unaware that you're not only a philosopher in your soul, but you're a philosopher in vocation. So the answer to the question, theological maverick or mystical traditionalist. So you're giving us a philosophical answer. It's a little bit of both.
Yes, the answer is probably a little bit of both.
Typical philosopher's answer to a straightforward question.
Yes. One of the fascinating things I didn't have time to investigate, and I think it would be a really interesting research project for another time, the most radical things Rabbi Sacks has to say about God are very similar to things that Rabbi Heschel had to say about God. And sketching the relationship between those two thinkers, I think, is something for future scholarship to turn to.
I thank you both. I thank you both for your papers. I thank you both for your partnership in bringing this whole issue about. I repeat my thank yous at the top of the hour to all the different forces that made this happen. We appreciate all of the authors, many of whom were with us online, some of whom you'll be hearing from in upcoming episodes of the Tradition podcast. To make sure you don't miss any of that upcoming content, be sure to go to traditiononline.org to subscribe to our newsletter, to get updated whenever we release new content online, to give us a like on Facebook if you hang out there so that you can follow what's going on. And of course, those of you that are interested in learning more about Rabbi Sacks's involvement with the tradition and the work that was done about Rabbi Sacks, you should visit our website. In the archives, you can see the essays he published with us. You can also see the archives of the Sacks Bookshelves project, which Gila Sacks had given a shout out to earlier in our program. That was a wonderful project that we got off the ground, I think, almost immediately with his passing 5 years ago, and that was headed by our friend and our associate editor, Rabbi Chaim Strauchler, and thanks to him. And of course, those of you that are listening, either live or on the recording, you want to know how you can get your hands on a copy of this wonderful volume. Well, if you're a subscriber to Tradition, you will get a copy, or you would have gotten a copy already. If you're not a subscriber to Tradition, shame on you. You can rectify that by going to traditiononline.org, or you can also, of course, order this one issue through our website, or you can get it in digital form for Kindle through Amazon. In our editor's introduction, which Sam and I must confess was drafted by Tzvi. No good piece of writing was ever put out by committee. Tzvi drafted it, and Sam and I worked together on it. But Tzvi reminded us that Rabbi Sacks would often would ask his students, would ask his friends, "What are you reading?" The same way that we might say, "How you doing?" or "Ma nishma." For Rabbi Sacks, the way to engage in conversation with people, to get at how they were doing, was what are you reading? So all of us, certainly this week of the Fifth Yard site, we're all reading Rabbi Sacks. But I would hope that we're also all reading Tradition. For those of us so committed to his vision of a type of Judaism that we must, by definition, we must be engaged with the ideas that are animating our religious, our spiritual, our human life. So you'll find all of that in the pages of Tradition, written by some of the most remarkable, particularly younger minds in our community, writers, both men and women. And it should be a given, but unfortunately it's not, that we feature the writings of remarkable female thinkers and writers from our community in our pages. And you can find all of that together with, of course, the writings and thinking of the hoary heads and great figures of our community together on the pages of Tradition in print and online. And we hope that those of you that consider yourselves part of this family, this mishpacha lomedet of what Tradition has always aspired to be and has tried to represent these nearly 7 decades, we hope that you will engage more deeply with what we're doing in the journal. And please follow the content that's going to be coming up in the days ahead. Next Monday evening, Erica Brown online talking about her essay on the day of the Yahrzeit itself, November 11th, the Global Day of Learning from RabbiSacks.org. And visit us at traditiononline.org to continue the conversation. Thank you all very much.